This is the Louie Tee Network.
In the L.A.B room.
Exclusive.
Welcome, you are in the lab room. I'm your host, Lou. Thank you for joining me here on the program, Coaching Carousel, here in the lab room. This is one of those topics that I like to come back and revisit after the Super Bowl has been completed. Season's over, playoffs, Super Bowl, all of that is done. This is one of those topics that kind of gets caught in the wash of the playoffs and the Super Bowl and the road to the Super Bowl. And so now that the season's over, we've got a time to reflect. Here's one of the topics that I want to tackle, and it's the coaching carousel. A lot of different faces in new places, and I want to talk about all of the things that has transpired with different franchises and their head man as we go on to the offseason in the National Football League. So I will go in sequential order. I will go in a timeline fashion, break down the coaches and some of the moves they've made within their staff, and we'll move on from there. So let's get right to business. December 31st, and it was funny because as we were all waiting for the ball to drop, the Houston Texans were busy trying to fill their head coaching vacancy. And right before the clock struck 12 and turned to the 2014 year, the Houston Texans made Bill O'Brien their next head coach of their franchise. And so they got it in right before that 2014 deadline. And so he is the next head coach of the Houston Texans, the first head coaching vacancy of the offseason to be filled. And Bill O'Brien is doing it a little differently in Houston. There's no offensive coordinator. That's somewhat of a controversy right now. We'll talk about that here in a second. Defensive coordinator under Bill O'Brien will be Romeo Crennel. Let's give you a little bit of background information on Bill O'Brien. Bill O'Brien is a guy that last season and the season prior to that was in Penn State helping turn around that program. We all know about the situation that happened in Penn State with the Joe Paterno situation and, you know, that whole nasty situation with the scandal. And look, he went in when nobody else wanted that job. He went in and he cleaned that program up, made them respectable again. And so he was a hot name in the NFL circles. Here's a guy that has been in the league. He comes from that New England Patriot tree. It was an offensive coordinator. You probably all remember him for that blow up on the sideline with Tom Brady. Tom Brady kind of got out of line with him. He being the offensive coordinator in New England at the time. Brady didn't like what he was saying. Brady shot at him. He came back at Brady. The two had to be broken up. And that kind of gives you a little bit of perspective as to how Bill O'Brien runs his ship. He's not a guy that's going to take a lot of lip. He's hard-nosed. He's in your face. I like Bill O'Brien a lot. Actually, I like him a lot. And I tell you what, this is a great hire in Houston because right now I feel like the Texans were being run by a guy in Gary Kubiak that was just too nice. He was a nice guy. It had loyalty issues where, Matt Schaub has been my quarterback. No, it's a business in the National Football League, and sometimes you got to be able to draw the line. And I feel like Bill O'Brien is the guy that will come in, and if guys aren't getting it done, if they're dead weight, he's going to shed that dead weight, cut his bait, he's going to move on. It's a great hire in Houston. But the thing that has been sparking a lot of controversy is the fact that he hasn't, nor will he, hire an offensive coordinator. He's an offensive-minded guy. He's going to be calling the plays, and he says, hey, what do I need an offensive coordinator for? If I'm going to call the plays, there doesn't need to be another guy in that room helping me with the game plan. You know what offensive coordinators do. Normally, they call the plays. If the head coach is an offensive-minded guy that wants to call his own plays, then the offensive coordinator normally is in the room helping to set up the game plan for that week's game, and he's in the room helping to kind of devise ways to break down opposing defenses. And so you normally keep an offensive coordinator because as a head coach, you wear so many hats that you don't really have a chance to get as intimate as maybe you would like to with the offense and the game plan. And so there's so many different things you have to do on game day. A lot of head coaches really don't want the responsibility of having to call plays. And those that do still want an offensive coordinator around so that he can have his finger on the pulse of the offense and what should and shouldn't be called, and kind of help you go along with what the game plan should be from week to week. So normally an offensive coordinator is still around. Even if he's not calling the plays, it's always good to have another set of eyes behind you, kind of looking over your shoulder to make sure that you're not missing something in case you're too busy caught up in something else. You may miss something. Offensive coordinator can say, hey, this is the coverage that they've been running for the first 3 quarters of the game. If we make this adjustment right now, we might be able to steal this game. So you always like to have an offensive coordinator. Bill O'Brien doesn't see the need for it. So we'll see how that goes in Houston. But Romeo Crennel is a guy that comes from that New England Patriots tree. And so Bill O'Brien having worked with the Patriots, Romeo Crennel having worked with the Patriots, there's a connection there. And look, there's never been any question as to whether Romeo Crennel could call defenses, can be a defensive coordinator in the league. This guy's one of the best in the league, one of the best in the business in terms of defensive coordinator. When you make him a head coach, then it's a different animal. But as a defensive coordinator, I think he's going to pick right up where Wade Phillips left off in Houston, having this Texans defense play as one of the better defenses in the National Football League. So that's the Houston Texans situation right now. Bill O'Brien is your head man, and I think he's going to get this offense back to where they need to be. I don't know if you have the quarterback per se in-house to get it done. We'll see how they attack that situation, having the #1 overall selection. They could go a number of ways. They could go the Jadeveon Clowney route. They could go a quarterback route. I think you always want to put your stamp on the franchise with a franchise QB. If that guy is at the top of the draft for you, if you're the Texans, you take him. If you don't like any of the guys in the first round and you think there's a guy maybe later on that fits your needs, you take Clowney or you take whoever fits your bill at that pick and you move on. We'll talk about the draft and what the Texans may or may not do a lot later down the line. Not in this show, but in the draft coverage, there's going to be plenty of time to break down the draft. We'll do that another time. Bill O'Brien, your head man in Houston. So you go down the timeline as the carousel continues to spin. You find yourself in Tampa Bay. 3 days later, January 3rd, the Buccaneers hire Lovie Smith. Now, to me, this was the best hire of all the hires. And again, we don't know how any of these are going to work out. But from my perspective, in terms of fit and the personnel that's already in-house, to me, this was the most sound hire of all of these hires that I'm going to speak with you about today. Lovie Smith in Tampa Bay. This defense is ready to rock and roll, okay? Lovie Smith is going to come in, take this Tampa Bay Buccaneers defense from here up to here, okay? They're going to be a top 10, possibly a top 5, maybe a top 3 defense in 2014. If guys stay healthy, with the talent that is on this roster, sky's the limit for this Tampa Bay Buccaneers defense. And so, Lovie Smith being hired in Tampa Bay, huge move. And you knew the Buccaneers had targeted their guy. I talked about this on the coaching video I did, the Black Monday video, a little bit earlier, about how the Buccaneers knew who they were targeting when they got rid of Greg Schiano. And so Lovie Smith is the next head coach of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. You look at the offensive coordinator, he plucks a guy from the college ranks, Jeff Tedford. We all know him, the famed quarterback guru at the University of Cal. We know about all the first round picks that he's turned out at the quarterback position. Aaron Rodgers, Kyle Bowler, Akili Smith. The list goes on and on and on. So now look, all of these guys haven't been successful at the next level. However, he's had a hand in making them first round picks. And so they're looking for big things out of Jeff Tedford at this level as the Buccaneers offensive coordinator. You look at defensive coordinator. Didn't take long for Leslie Frazier, ex-Minnesota Vikings head coach, to land on his feet. He is now the defensive coordinator in Tampa Bay. And again, Lovie Smith will have his hand in that defensive coordinator jar. But again, here's a guy in Leslie Frazier that Lovie Smith trusts. And he understands all the concepts that Lovie wants to run. These guys have worked together before in the past. And so they come from that Tony Dungy tree, do Lovie Smith and Leslie Frazier. And so expect these guys to be on one accord and really be thinking the same way when talking about this Buccaneers defense and that cover two shell and them being an aggressive defense, but not over aggressive, not giving up a lot of big plays. Expect this Buccaneers defense to be playing some extremely good football in 2014 because of a guy like Leslie Frazier coming in and manning up that defense, because of a guy like Lovie Smith running the show as the head coach. Tampa Bay Buccaneers find their man in Lovie Smith. I expect this team to be dangerous, a la the Carolina Panthers in 2013. Don't know if the offense will be as proficient as that Panthers offense was in 2013, but this defense will be just like the Panthers and some of the other teams that were dangerous in the NFC. This is a team you have to watch out for with Lovie Smith as head coach. Watch out for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. This defense is going to be for real. You look at the timeline, and as we continue to go around and spin on this coaching carousel, you end up in the Washington Redskins territory, January 9th. Redskins hire Jay Gruden. And I'm not going to really talk about the Redskins because I've done that on a separate video. Redskins hire Jay Gruden as the new head coach. And so you want a lot of information on that situation, look at that video. I will say this because this is something that was not known at the time of that video. There is an offensive coordinator in Washington. Sean McVay has been promoted from tight ends coach. He's going to be the new offensive coordinator. Defensive coordinator remains Jim Haslett. That has ruffled a lot of feathers within the fan base, but I think that's a smart move. I love Jim Haslett. Think he got a raw deal with Shanahan as the head coach. Think he's going to really get a chance to spread his wings and do his thing now that Jay Gruden is the head coach. Look out for the Redskins. Jay Gruden, new head coach. Sean McVay, your offensive coordinator. Jim Haslett is the defensive coordinator in Washington. So that is how the hierarchy looks in Washington as we continue down the list of coaches. We spin to the next location in this coaching carousel. January 13th, Tennessee Titans hire Ken Whisenhunt. And this was a crazy situation in Tennessee. Mike Munchak, a guy that has been with the Tennessee Titans organization for over 3 decades as a player, as an assistant coach, and then the head coach, had a mutual disagreement with the front office. They wanted him to run his show one way, and they probably told him, hey, you got to get rid of X head coach and X head coach and X head coach, and you got to do it this way. And he said, look, I'm not parting with my guys. If those guys can't remain on my staff, if my staff can't remain intact the way I want it, then I can't do this. And so they said, okay, well, fine. If you don't want to cut bait with some of your guys, then we're going to have to cut bait with you. And so these guys agreed to disagree, parted ways, and that's how we find ourselves with Ken Whisenhunt as the new head man in Tennessee. And so I love the hire because I always thought and was in the school of thinking that Ken Whisenhunt got a raw deal in Arizona. And when you don't have a quarterback, you don't have a chance. You know the saying, okay? And so in Arizona, after Warner departed, there was nothing there. He thought he had his guy in Matt Leinart, and Matt Leinart simply was not a good quarterback in the National Football League, and hence he ended up going through a slew of guys that could not get it done at this level. Hence, he ended up getting canned in Arizona. You look at his offensive coordinator, Jason Michael. Here's a guy has never been an offensive coordinator in the National Football League. He was the tight ends coach in San Diego. That's where Ken Whisenhunt is coming from. So he is very familiar with Jason Michael, having worked with him in the 2013 NFL season. He brings him along and promotes him to an offensive coordinator spot. Defensive coordinator Ray Horton, he goes back to Whisenhunt in the Arizona days. Horton was on the Cleveland Browns staff last season. That whole staff went away as they fired Rob Chudzinski. And so Horton was happily reunited with Ken Whisenhunt in Tennessee. He will run that defense. Wherever Ray Horton goes, usually a great defense follows. He had the Arizona Cardinals playing some really good defense a couple of seasons back. He was in the running for a couple of head coaching jobs. He had the Cleveland Browns defense playing some really good ball last season. I expect the Tennessee Titans to follow suit. So you look at the hire of Ken Whisenhunt, one thing's for sure, they're going to shake some things up. I don't know if Jake Locker is the guy in Tennessee or not, but I will say this. Ken Wisenhunt is not going to make the same mistake twice. He got fired in Arizona because of his quarterbacking situation. Trust me, if he doesn't feel 110% sure that Jake Locker is the man in Tennessee, expect him to go out and attack that position with aggression, whether it be through free agency or the draft or both. If Jake Locker is not his guy in Tennessee, expect some changes at that all-important position in Tennessee. And really, I don't expect Chris Johnson to be back at that running back position either. So some major changes could be looming in Tennessee with Ken Wisenhunt as your head man in Tennessee. So you move down the very next day, the coaching carousel. You know how this works. Once dominoes start to fall into place in different locations, the picture becomes clearer and teams find their guy. They narrow their focus and they find their guy. So the very next day, the Detroit Lions hire Jim Caldwell. And for a lot of people, wasn't a big splash hire, but in Detroit, where a lot of people, we talked about this. I've talked about this for years. And a lot of the analysts have talked about the dysfunction in Detroit, the lack of control and stability within, and a lot of it stemmed from a lot of undisciplined players, and the coach wasn't that disciplined himself. It just wasn't a good environment in Detroit. Reggie Bush actually spoke to that after the firing of one Jim Schwartz. And so when you look at the hire of Jim Caldwell, I feel like it's the absolute opposite of what they had in Detroit before with Jim Schwartz. Here's a guy in Caldwell that's very mild-mannered, a guy that's not going to really raise his voice per se. He's not a screamer or a yeller, much like Jim Schwartz was, but he's the opposite. He's going to bring in a very calming influence on this football team, but also he's going to bring a winning pedigree, something that the Detroit Lions lack on this organization. You look at where Caldwell has come from. He was a winner under Tony Dungy in Indy. He took that team after Dungy left to the Super Bowl. Now they didn't win, but he got them to the mountaintop. They just didn't conquer. When they got there, you look at him in Baltimore. He comes on late in the season and helps them win a Super Bowl. So here's a guy that has winning pedigree, something that the Detroit Lions lack. And he is great. I repeat, great with quarterbacks, something that the Lions need because Matthew Stafford sort of regressed last season. He's going to come in, work very closely with Matthew Stafford and try to get him back on track where he's not throwing the football to the other team as much and finding other guys to get the football to. So love the hire of Jim Caldwell in Detroit. You look at his offensive coordinator, Joe Lombardi. Look, anytime you hear Lombardi, you immediately think Vince Lombardi. He is absolutely kin to Vince Lombardi, but again, that has nothing to do with what's going on now. Just because Vince Lombardi is his, uncle, great uncle, or whatever the case may be, doesn't mean that he can coach. But we're going to find out what Joe Lombardi can do as an offensive coordinator. Last 5 years, he spent time in New Orleans as the quarterback coach, looking over the shoulder of Drew Brees. So if anything, if he learned by osmosis from Drew Brees, then he's going to bring a lot to the table here as the offensive coordinator of the Detroit Lions. You look at defensive coordinator, Terrell Austin is a guy that's coming from Baltimore. Jim Caldwell was in Baltimore for the last year and a half, so he knows Terrell Austin well. He was the defensive backs coach in Baltimore, so Austin comes over with a very defensive mind, and he's going to come in and try to make this Detroit Lions defense a lot better because I feel like a lot of the pieces on this defense are there for them to be great. They just have to be put in the right positions to make plays. Enter in Terrell Austin. He's going to come in. He's already said, hey, we're not going to blitz all of the time, and we're not just going to play four-man across all the time, which is music to the ears of Detroit Lions fans. He's going to come in, mix it up, and really give a spark to this Detroit Lions defense that has a lot of talented players. DeAndre Levy and Ndamukong Suh. The list goes on and on. Louis Delvins. There are a lot of players that can play and one at each level that is dominant. with Ziggy Ansah on the horizon as a player that you feel like can do some big things, there are a lot of pieces for Terrell Austin to play with. Look for this Detroit Lions team to be better, and can't be much worse than they were record-wise in 2013. Look for them to be better under the leadership of Jim Caldwell, their new head coach in Detroit. So you go to the very next day after that again. When this coaching carousel is in effect and it's spinning around, when teams start finding their guys, it makes the picture a lot clearer for the other teams that don't have their head coach. And so the day after the Lions find their guy, the Minnesota Vikings solidified their head coaching spot on January 15th with the hire of Mike Zimmer. To me, this was a long time coming. It's been a long time coming, but I know Mike was going to get a job. Oh, yes, he was. He should have had a job 5 years ago. He should have had a job 3 years ago. He should have had a job last season, but it just always seemed that Mike Zimmer got passed over for somebody else. Well, that happened to not be the case this time around. Good for Mike Zimmer. He deserves this job. He's a fiery guy that's been a defensive coordinator in a number of spots, has succeeded and passed the test of being a defensive coordinator with flying colors, and he's finally getting an opportunity to be the head man. And he said in his press conference, I've got a chip on my shoulder. I've been overlooked. I've been passed over for too long. I'm getting the opportunity now, and I will not disappoint. I love Mike Zimmer, and he's got a fire in his belly that is he's going to put off on his players. He's going to motivate them, and defensively, this Vikings team is going to be really, really good under the leadership of Mike Zimmer. You look at offensive coordinator Norv Turner. Look, one of the best offensive minds there's ever been in the National Football League is Norv Turner. So him coming on board as the offensive coordinator of the Minnesota Vikings bodes well for not only Adrian Peterson, but for a guy like Cordell Patterson. You saw what Norv Turner was able to do with a guy like Josh Gordon. Flash Gordon in Cleveland. What do you think he's going to do for a guy like Cordell Patterson? Sky's the limit for a guy with as much talent and potential as Cordell Patterson. You put him in the mix with Norv Turner, we're talking about potential explosion here in the 2014 season. So Norv Turner is going to definitely help this Vikings offense take steps in leaps and bounds. However, it all starts with the quarterback position, and Norv has already said, hey, we're definitely going to be looking to add a young quarterback to the mix. Look, I don't know what that means for Christian Ponder, but I don't think Christian Ponder is the answer in Minnesota. So we will see what the future holds for the quarterback position in Minnesota. But one thing's for sure, whoever the quarterback is under center, Norv Turner will get the most out of those guys in the Minnesota Vikings offensive system. So defensive coordinator George Edwards. Here's a guy that's been a long time NFL guy, around in many different jobs, Redskins, Dolphins, Cowboys, you name it, he's been there. He's getting a chance to be a defensive coordinator under Zimmer. And so I'm looking for big things from this Vikings football team. And Zimmer, I feel like he is destined to be great as a head coach. Now, it's different being a head coach from being a coordinator. We don't know what Zimmer is going to be like, but he's been around a lot of different head coaches. Feel like he's probably taken a little bit of something from all of those guys, but he's going to use his style of coaching, and I think he's going to be successful. Just have to see what this offense is going to be like. But with Norv Turner as your offensive coordinator, you got to feel good if you are a Minnesota Vikings fan. Having Mike Zimmer overlook this defense and having Norv Turner quarterback this offense, you're in good hands with those two coaches doing their jobs on those respective sides of the football. So the Vikings hire Mike Zimmer, ex-Cincinnati Bengals defensive coordinator, as their new head coach. And last but not least, we finally get the coaching carousel to stop spinning in Cleveland, January 23rd. There was a lot of hoopla, a lot of controversy, a lot of ire drawn by these Cleveland Browns for taking so long to find their head coach. It almost seemed as if nobody wanted the Cleveland Browns job. When this whole carousel got underway, I was hearing that there were two jobs that were going to be pretty hard to fill because of the uncertainty of the front office and a lot of the turmoil that existed around these franchises. And that was the Washington Redskins job. Well, they didn't have a problem filling their void. And the Cleveland Browns job. And to me, when looking at the talent of all of these teams, I thought the Browns were top 3, top 4, if not top 2 in terms of talent. You got to think the Lions held the most talent of all these teams that were looking to fill vacancies. The Redskins have a lot of talent on their football team as well. They don't have elite talent, but they have talent. You look at the Lions, they've got elite talent on their football team. Buccaneers are young and hungry. Texans, to me, are on the decline. A lot of older players holding them up. Vikings, they've got talent, but to me, they don't have elite stuff. Love Harrison Smith. Really love some of the pieces, Brian Robinson, that they have defensively. But offensively, after Adrian Peterson, Cordell Patterson, really don't know how I feel about them offensively. But again, they've got some stuff. Kyle Rudolph. There's talent in Minnesota, but the quarterback position scares you in Minnesota as well as in Tennessee with Jake Locker. But there's talent on this Tennessee Titans roster as well. But you look at the Browns, and to me, they were among the most talented of these teams. I think after the Lions, you got to look at Cleveland as probably being the next most talented team with all the pieces that they have offensively and defensively. I just drool over what the Browns have to offer. But again, when you don't have a quarterback, that kind of scares people away. And then when you look at the situation of Rob Chudzinski getting fired after only 1 year of service, that scares players away. Not only players, but prospective head coaches. Look, I don't want to come to a place, move my family, uproot my family, take them to a new location, and not have stability. And I think that scared a lot of prospective coaches away. You got some players that are up for free agency within this Browns organization that, hey, I don't know if I want to come back here because there's no stability here. There's no foundation. I don't know who I can trust. I don't know if the coach that they bring in is going to be here next season. I mean, that's the type of situation the Browns have created. And so it took them a while. As you can see, the last team in this coaching carousel to find their head coach. But January 23rd, the Cleveland Browns hire Mike Pettine. And just in case you don't know how I feel about Mike Pettine, I said that this guy is a star in the making. Check this out.
And this is why I love Mike Pettine. Absolutely love him. I love Mike Pettine because he's not going to give you an opportunity to get comfortable, especially when you're at home. Mike Pettine is sitting in the kitchen sink, and if you allow him to, he'll throw the kitchen sink, he'll throw the bathroom sink, he'll throw the laundry room sink, any sink he can get his hands on. He's throwing the whole defensive playbook at you. Can you digest that? I don't think so. And I feel bad. Let me say this now. I feel bad for any team late in the season looking to get into the postseason, trying to scratch and claw and vie for a playoff spot. Late in the season, that has to go to Buffalo. I feel for you because that's a dangerous team in Buffalo when they're playing in Buffalo. That's a dangerous squad because they play defense. And I tell you, this is a young, up-and-coming defense. Mike Pettine, their defensive coordinator, I wouldn't be surprised if he's at the top of a lot of people's short list of next head coaching prospects. I wouldn't be surprised if he wasn't around in Buffalo next season. He's doing a phenomenal job in Buffalo with his defense.
So you know exactly how I feel about Mike Pettine. I've said this on numerous occasions. This guy has NFL head coach written all over him. And I said at some point he's going to be a star. He's going to be a head coach. And lo and behold, the Browns, it took them a while. And look, they say that good things come to those who wait. Maybe, just maybe, by the Browns taking so long and having such a tedious search for their next head coach, maybe they've uncovered a diamond in the rough in Mike Pettine. I love this guy. I love his demeanor. I love what he does on the defensive side of the football. With all the talent that the Browns have defensively, there's some things that he can do with this defense. I think the sky's the limit for Mike Pettine as the head coach of the Cleveland Browns. Now, again, it all starts and ends with the quarterback position. Browns currently don't have that guy. We'll see how they address that situation. But offensive coordinator Kyle Shanahan, coming over from Washington, trying to really come out of the shadow of his dad, Mike Shanahan. He's been in some situations where teams have dominated offensively. In Houston, they had the top rushing offense, and they were putting up big points and yards in Houston. He went on to work under his dad in Washington. Redskins led the league in rushing and won the division in 2012. 2013, they were among one of the best rushing teams once again in the National Football League. He can do some things offensively. I think if he gets all of the pieces necessary, they need a running back in Cleveland. That running back by committee thing, I really don't like it. Don't think it's going to work. We'll see how they address that. But of course, the first issue in Cleveland, who's your quarterback? Who's your signal caller? They get that fixed in Cleveland with Kyle Shanahan calling the plays. You could be in good hands in Cleveland. You look at defensive coordinator Jim O'Neill. Here's a guy that was the linebackers coach in Buffalo last season, where you got your head coach Mike Pettine from. Pettine was the defensive coordinator in Buffalo. O'Neill, linebackers coach, so he just brings him over with him, promotes him to defensive coordinator. So Jim O'Neill is going to get an opportunity to really stake his claim in Cleveland as a defensive coordinator. So I love the talent on this Cleveland Browns football team. I like the head coach that they've hired. Now it's time for some action. Time for some action in Cleveland. All the pieces are there. Now it's all about getting the structure, getting the quarterback, getting the running back, and getting some continuity in Cleveland and getting this thing off and running in the right direction. So that's the coaching carousel essentially in the National Football League. Here's some near misses. Dennis Allen, Oakland Raiders coach, was able to keep his job. He's going to remain on that Oakland Raiders staff as their head coach, and he was able to keep the majority of his staff in Oakland intact. Joe Philbin of the Miami Dolphins, he dodged a bullet. Some of his compadres weren't as lucky. Mike Sherman terminated as offensive coordinator in Miami. GM Jeff Ireland also given the pink slip. He and the organization agreed to part ways. So Philbin dodged a bullet. But again, anytime you change general managers, you're on borrowed time. Philbin has to win next season in order to keep his job, or else that new general manager will be looking for his guy to be in as the head coach. And last but not least, Jason Garrett was able to keep his job in Dallas. It looked a little iffy after the Cowboys weren't able to get into the postseason, but that injury to Tony Romo probably saved his job, because if Romo plays and they don't make it to the postseason, I don't know if Jason Garrett is around in Dallas. But because of the injury to Romo, that gives Jerry Jones an excuse to hold on to Jason Garrett for at least one more season. And so he got a second chance at life in Dallas because of that injury. Jason Garrett remains the head coach in Dallas. So that wraps up the coaching carousel. A lot of different faces in new places. We'll see how these organizations look to attack free agency and the draft, and how these teams kind of fill in their rosters and look to compete in 2014. That's going to do it for me here in the lab room. You know how this goes. If it happens in the National Football League, whether big or small, we cover it all here in the lab room. I thank you for joining me. See you next time as I continue to break down all of the happenings in the offseason in the National Football League. Like the content? Want more? Sub up.
In the Lab Room.